What I'm about to recount is not an occult experience per se, but for me, it was truly a dreadful one. So despite the length, I'm recording it here. My apologies to those expecting a ghost story. Please bear with me a while. Until last year, I worked at a foreign-owned company. At one point, I was asked to transfer temporarily overseas to country C. My company had a factory there, and the purpose was a long-term secondment to train their engineers in systems used at our Japan sites. Though called long-term, it was just until local staff could take over operations with very appealing conditions. Great compensation abroad and a plum roll on returning. After some thought, I accepted. The night I completed the handover training at the Shi factory, I had dinner with my predecessor, Tae. Half a year into his posting, Tae had requested repatriation to Japan for health reasons. The man before me did look haggard and sickly, clearly exhausted mentally and physically. Tae gave me lots of advice about life on set, but especially emphasized, never go near the hill behind the warehouse. When I'd asked why, he just shut his mouth. Eventually, Tae returned to Japan, and my life in Shi began. She had only recently emerged from years of brutal civil war, profoundly impacting the populace. The factory outskirts were rural, relatively untouched by conflict. But guerrilla massacres and raids had reached even the villages, it seemed. Families deprived of providers and livelihoods by the war were in dire poverty. Their children loitered by the factory road like beggars. Also, widowed women were preferentially hired at the plant, their kids playing nearby while mothers worked. Many such children gathered around the factory. I befriended them, often joining their games on breaks and free time. One lunch break, a boy named Tae invited me to a neat place nearby. Trusting we wouldn't go far, I followed him and his sister S into the woods by the factory. A short walk through the trees opened into a large clearing. K and S happily started kicking a ball around. I joined in but couldn't steal the ball from K. Without getting serious, he had skills. After a while, break ended and I returned to work. A few days later, I was again with K and S at the clearing. That day, I sat idly in the shade watching them play. Glancing in the factory's direction, I noticed a warehouse a bit away. Suddenly recalling Tae's ominous words, "Never go near the hill behind the warehouse." Come to think of it, the land here was elevated like a hill. I called Kay over and suggested we head back. Looking around for S, she was across the trees staring at something. There was a yellow ball-like object on the ground. Crouching to pick it up, a loud bang suddenly sounded from S's direction, and I turned. S lay collapsed. I rushed over, but it was too late. Her limbs bent unnaturally, blood pooling beneath her. Numb with shock, I slowly realized the yellow thing was an anti-personal mine. Of course, I'd heard about mines before coming to Shi. That some were playful colors and shapes, claiming child victims now missing limbs. I'd seen those heartbreaking photos, but it hadn't felt real to me. Shamefully, until seeing S's mutilated body, it never occurred to me a small child could be victimized right before my eyes. Looking back, Kay was there sobbing uncontrollably. Legally, the deadly hill was factory grounds, off limits as a mine risk. But the surrounding barbed wire had long been stolen, I was told. I wanted to see S's family and apologize, but the local staff and factory head all objected. It was an accident. You're absolutely not at fault. Everyone comforted me that way. Later, I learned the company had paid S's family funeral damages. I took some time off and couldn't bring myself to play with the kids when I returned. Never saw Kay again. Eventually, my assignment ended and I came back to Japan. First thing, I contacted Tae and we met. Seeing me, he seemed to realize something, sighing deeply. "You have my sympathy." After a pause, I asked Tae, "You went through the same experience there, right?" "Yes, for me it was a bore. A rad landmine." "What happened after?" "Probably the same as you. About a month later, different kids showed up to play. No barbed wire left anywhere." Tae looked profoundly saddened. "After that, it was constant. brothers, sisters, so many. The funeral money for S's family, paltry to us, but Inshi could support them for years. One less mouth to feed too. For a time, Tae and I sat cursing the fates of those children in silent grief.